The Georgia heat of 1865 was a suffocating blanket, a sharp contrast to the familiar comforts Rebecca Dawson had lost. The war had ended, but its invisible scars ran deep, leaving an unspoken despair in its wake. The old Dawson plantation house, her childhood home, was a crumbling shell, its paint peeling and gardens overgrown. She stood on the porch, a letter clutched in her hand, a summons from her Uncle Silas, a man she barely knew. The letter was brutally concise. Her father was gone, a victim of fever, not a bullet. Orphaned and alone, her only recourse was Blackwood Manor, a place whispered about in hushed tones, hidden deep in a shadowed forest known as the Hollow. Locals warned of its dark history, of a memory that clung to its very stones. Her bags were packed. The old house felt empty, echoing with ghosts of a life that no longer existed. As the sun set, a carriage appeared, its gruff driver a man with too many burdens. Rebecca took one last look at her past and stepped into an uncertain future. The journey was a descent into an eerie twilight. The road narrowed, the trees growing taller and more foreboding, their branches twisted like skeletal fingers. The air grew cold and damp, a stark change from the oppressive heat. The silence in the carriage was punctuated only by the creaking of the wheels and the distant cries of unseen creatures. Finally, the trees parted, and Blackwood Manor emerged from the gloom. It was a vast, Gothic structure of dark, weathered stone, its narrow windows like vacant eyes. Ivy, thick and ancient, clung to the walls, giving it a forgotten, swallowed appearance. A profound sense of isolation washed over Rebecca. This wasn't just a new home. It was a different world. The front door opened, revealing a tall, gaunt figure, Uncle Silas. His face was sharp, his eyes a piercing grey. He was impeccably dressed, a sharp contrast to the tattered landscape. His voice was low and gravelly, devoid of any warmth. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor," he stated, a chillingly formal greeting that sent a shiver down her spine. As she followed him inside, the heavy door closing behind her with a final thud, Rebecca felt the outside world vanish. The entrance hall was a cavernous space of shadows and grand, unsettling portraits. Each step on the creaking floorboards was amplified in the oppressive silence. He led her to a large, sparsely furnished room, a place of cold elegance and an unnerving sense of tidiness. "Dinner will be served in an hour," he said before leaving, the lock clicking softly behind him. Rebecca stood alone, the profound silence of the house pressing in on her. She felt like a prisoner, a guest in a place that held its breath, waiting. At dinner, the silence was a heavy, suffocating presence, broken only by the clinking of silverware. Uncle Silas ate methodically, offering no conversation. He spoke only in cryptic sentences about the house's memory, a statement that sent a shiver down her spine. The grand dining table felt vast and empty, emphasizing her profound loneliness. She returned to her room, the silence of the corridors more profound than ever. She was here, a part of Blackwood Manor's silent history. She had not found a safe haven. She had walked into a narrative far older and more complex than she could ever imagine. The first night was merely an introduction, a subtle opening act to a drama whose full horror was yet to unfold. Sleep felt like a distant, unattainable luxury. The first few days at Blackwood Manor passed in a state of suspended animation. The routine was as rigid and silent as the house itself. Rebecca would rise with the sun, the room still shrouded in a pre-dawn gloom, and dress in her simple gowns. She would then descend the grand, echoing staircase to the dining room, where Uncle Silas would already be seated, a pristine linen napkin folded neatly beside his untouched plate. Breakfast, like dinner, was a silent affair. He ate with a slow, deliberate grace, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance, his mind seemingly elsewhere. Rebecca, starved for conversation, would try to initiate a dialogue, asking about the estate, the local area, anything to fill the suffocating void. His answers were always clipped, monosyllabic, a verbal wall that left her feeling foolish and isolated. After breakfast, her days were a solitary exploration of the house and its immediate surroundings. The interior of Blackwood Manor was a mausoleum of forgotten memories. Each room was meticulously clean but seemed to lack a soul. The furniture, heavy and ornate, was draped in white sheets in some of the unused parlors, their forms like ghostly figures. The library was a vast, silent sanctuary, its shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes on history, philosophy, and botany, but all of them seemed untouched, the pages yellowed and crisp. Rebecca spent hours there, running her fingers over the spines, a silent communion with the past. The dust-free environment was both a testament to Martha's diligence and a subtle hint of the lack of life within these walls. The garden, too, was an enigma. Beyond the immediate, meticulously trimmed hedge that bordered the house, the foliage grew wild and untamed. The once grand rose bushes were now tangled messes of thorny vines, their blooms small and sickly. Weeping willows, their branches like mournful trailing hair, stood sentinel over a stagnant pond where a thick green film had settled on the water's surface. A path led deeper into the woods, but Rebecca felt an instinctive reluctance to follow it, a feeling of being watched from within the shadows of the ancient trees. Uncle Silas was an apparition. He was there, yet not truly present. He spent most of his days in a study on the second floor, a room Rebecca had not been invited into. She would hear the faint scratch of his pen on paper, the soft thud of a book closing, but he was a distant, unreachable figure. The only other person she saw with any regularity was Martha, the elderly maid, who moved with a quiet efficiency, her face a mask of polite indifference. She answered Rebecca's questions about the house and its history with short, carefully worded phrases that revealed nothing. "The master prefers things a certain way, miss," was her common refrain, a polite but firm end to any inquiry. One afternoon, as a particularly heavy rainstorm lashed against the windows, confining her to the house, Rebecca found herself in an unused sitting room on the first floor. It was a smaller, cozier space than the grand parlors, with a fireplace that still held the faint scent of old smoke. On a small side table, beneath a layer of fine dust, lay a stack of old, leather-bound journals. A wave of curiosity washed over her, a small rebellion against the suffocating silence. She wiped the dust off the top one and opened it. The handwriting was a delicate, almost spidery script, and the ink was faded with age. The first entry was dated 1830. It was a diary kept by a woman named Eleanor, a relative she had never heard of. Rebecca began to read, her heart thumping in her chest. The entries were a mix of mundane daily life, descriptions of parties, a visit from a neighbor, and a growing sense of disquiet. Eleanor spoke of her husband, a man she referred to only as S, and his increasingly strange behavior. He was a man of science, she wrote, a man obsessed with legacy and lineage. He believed that certain traits, certain inclinations, were inherited, passed down through the bloodline. He was meticulous in his record-keeping, obsessed with family trees and the purity of the Dawson name. As Rebecca read on, the entries grew more frantic. Eleanor spoke of S conducting experiments, though she never specified what they were. She wrote of a profound loneliness, of a feeling that she was being watched, even in her own bedroom. One entry, dated July 1845, sent a jolt of alarm through Rebecca. Eleanor wrote of S's discovery of a new specimen, a person, a child she referred to only as L. There was a sense of foreboding, of fear that seeped from the page. He says L is special, a pure line untouched by the common flaws. But I see only a child, and he is changing her. I fear what he is turning her into. The entries ended abruptly after that. Rebecca closed the journal, her hands trembling. Who was Eleanor? Who was S? And who was this child, L? She had a sickening feeling that S was Silas's father, a man she had been told little about. The obsession with lineage and purity, the clinical detachment, it all felt so eerily familiar. The psychological horror of it, the idea of a person being an experiment, was more chilling than any ghost story. The next morning, Rebecca, unable to contain her curiosity, decided to venture into a part of the house she had not yet explored. The West Wing. It was a section of the house she had avoided, an area that seemed to hold a deeper, more profound silence. As she approached the hallway leading to it, a subtle shift in the air occurred. It grew colder, and a faint, musty smell, like old books and decay, clung to the air. The floorboards here were different, a darker, rougher wood. The first door she tried was locked. So was the second, and the third. A wave of apprehension washed over her. Why were these doors locked? She tried the knob on the final door at the end of the hall. It turned with a soft click. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pushed the door open, a thin beam of light from the window at the end of the hallway cutting through the gloom. The room was not a bedroom, but a study of some kind. A large wooden desk stood in the center, and against the far wall were shelves filled not with books, but with meticulously organized folders and ledgers. Rebecca stepped inside, the hairs on the back of her neck prickling. The air was heavy, charged with a strange, static energy. She ran her hand over the desk. It was spotless. She hesitantly opened one of the ledgers. The pages were filled with a spidery handwriting, the same as in Eleanor's journal, and countless, meticulously drawn family trees. Names, dates, and small coded notes filled the pages. As she flipped through, she saw the Dawson name repeated over and over, intertwined with other families. She saw her own name, her father's, her mother's. But then she saw something else, something that made her blood run cold. In one of the ledgers, under the name Silas Dawson, there were detailed notes. Notes about his intellectual acuity, his lack of emotional response, and his ideal genetic markers. Her uncle Silas wasn't just obsessed with lineage, he was obsessed with himself. And the notes weren't just about him, they were about her, the child from Eleanor's journal. L was a code. In the margins, in a different handwriting, a neater, more precise script, were notes about her development, her physical traits, her psychological responses. There were sketches of a young girl, a child with dark, haunted eyes. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Rebecca slammed the ledger shut, her heart leaping into her throat. She froze, her breath catching in her chest, listening. Silence. She waited, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach, but heard nothing more. She quickly returned the ledger to its place, her mind reeling, and slipped out of the room, closing the door behind her, the lock clicking back into place. She fled down the hallway, her footsteps silent on the rough wood, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror. The discovery was more horrifying than she could have imagined. Her family wasn't just strange. There was a dark, obsessive history, a meticulous, almost scientific madness. Her ancestors, or at least some of them, had seen their own children as experiments, as a means to some dark, unimaginable end. She burst into her own room, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and locked the door behind her. She leaned against it, her eyes closed, her mind replaying the images from the ledger. The family trees, the coded notes, the sketches of the child. It was all a horrifying puzzle, and she, a direct descendant, was suddenly an unwilling participant in the game. She was alone in this vast, terrifying house, and her only living relative was a man who saw her not as family, but as a subject, a part of a long-standing, horrifying legacy. Rebecca knew she couldn't stay. The fear was a cold, tangible presence in the room, more real than the elegant furniture. She had to leave, to find a way out of Blackwood Manor, away from Uncle Silas and the dark secrets that clung to its walls. But how? She had no money, no connections, and the nearest town was miles away, a treacherous journey on a road she barely knew. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors of fire and decay, Rebecca sat on her bed, her mind racing. She was no longer a grieving woman seeking refuge. She was a survivor. She had stumbled upon a horrifying truth, a legacy of madness and control. The house, its silence, her uncle's detachment, it all made a terrible sense now. A new resolution hardened her resolve. She would not simply run, she would understand. She would find out what happened to Eleanor and the child, Elle. She would uncover the full extent of this madness. The fear was still there, a cold weight in her stomach, but it was now tempered by a fierce, burning curiosity. She would use the silence of the house, the empty rooms, to her advantage. She would become a ghost in her own home, moving unseen, listening, observing, until she had all the answers she needed. She would face the darkness head-on, not as a victim, but as the one who finally brought its secrets to light. Rebecca's new resolution was tested almost immediately. The next morning at breakfast, Uncle Silas, to her profound surprise, broke his customary silence. He looked at her directly, his grey eyes piercing, and a slow, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a purely performative gesture that sent a jolt of unease through her. "I trust you are settling in, Rebecca?" he asked, his voice as low and gravelly as ever. Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. She was certain he knew. He knew she had been in the study. He knew she had seen the ledgers. His sudden conversational turn was a deliberate move, a show of control. She met his gaze, trying to keep her own expression neutral. "Yes, thank you, Uncle Silas. The house is grand," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands beneath the table. "Grandeur comes with a price," he said, the smile widening slightly. "The price of history, of lineage. It is a great responsibility to carry the weight of a family's past." He was baiting her, she realized, testing her, trying to gauge how much she knew. She kept her composure, her mind racing for a safe response. "I suppose so," she said, taking a sip of water. "The family portraits are quite striking. The resemblance is remarkable, even to the distant relatives." He nodded, a flicker of something she couldn't name. Pride, a cold, detached satisfaction in his eyes. "Indeed, the bloodline is strong. It is important to preserve its purity, its integrity." The word purity struck her like a physical blow. It was the same word Eleanor had used in her journal, the same word that had been repeated in the ledgers. Her blood ran cold. She was not just a niece, she was a part of his macabre study, a living testament to a twisted family legacy. After breakfast, her usual solitary explorations felt different. The house, which had been a silent witness, now felt like a living entity, a spider's web she was caught in. She began to see the details she had previously overlooked, the subtle patterns in the wallpaper that seemed to form unsettling shapes in the shadows. The way the light, even on a sunny day, seemed to struggle to penetrate the gloom of the corridors. The faint, almost imperceptible scent of decay that seemed to cling to the air in certain parts of the house. She decided to approach Martha. The elderly maid was in the kitchen, a stark, functional room with a large cast-iron stove and shelves of copper pots and pans. Martha was peeling potatoes, her movements slow and precise. "Martha," Rebecca began, her voice low, "can I ask you something?" The maid paused, her hands still, but she didn't look up. "Depends on what it is, miss." "My Uncle Silas, he has a study in the West Wing. Do you know who used to work there before him?" Rebecca asked, choosing her words carefully. Martha resumed her work, a quick, almost dismissive gesture. That's been Master Silas's study for as long as I've been here, miss. Before that, it was his father's. The master, before Master Silas. Rebecca pressed on. And do you remember anything about his father? Or his wife, Eleanor? Martha's hands stilled again. She finally looked up, her pale blue eyes filled with a flash of something Rebecca couldn't decipher. Fear. A warning. Eleanor was a quiet woman, miss. She kept to herself. As for the master before Master Silas, he was a man of his time. He kept his thoughts to himself. And a child? Was there a child named Elle? Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. Martha's face hardened, her expression turning into a polite but impenetrable wall. I don't know anything about that, miss. I was a young girl then, just starting my service. I kept to my duties and knew my place. Best you do the same, miss. It's a quiet house and it likes to stay that way. The subtle warning was clear. Martha was a loyal servant, and she was not going to break her silence, no matter how much Rebecca pushed. Rebecca left the kitchen, the knot of fear in her stomach tightening. She was truly alone in this house. The servants were either too loyal or too afraid to speak. That evening, Rebecca decided to test the limits of her uncle's surveillance. She feigned a headache and retired to her room early, telling a servant she would not be coming down for dinner. After the house had fallen into a profound silence, she slipped out of her room, a single oil lamp in her hand, its flickering flame casting long, dancing shadows. She wore her oldest, quietest dress, the fabric a soft wool that made no rustling sound. She moved with the stealth of a ghost, her bare feet silent on the cold wood floors. She had a new destination in mind, a place she had not yet explored. The attic. The access was from a small, unassuming door at the end of the main hallway on the second floor. It was a place where old things were stored, a repository of forgotten memories. If there were secrets to be found, they would be there. The door creaked as she opened it, the sound amplified in the stillness. A steep, narrow staircase led up into the absolute darkness. The air was thick with the scent of dust and mothballs. She held the lamp high and began her ascent. The attic was a vast, sprawling space under the sloped roof of the house. It was a labyrinth of forgotten furniture shrouded in white sheets, broken rocking chairs, and steamer trunks, all cloaked in a thick layer of dust. The beam of her lamp cut through the gloom, illuminating strange, spectral shapes. She moved slowly, her heart pounding, listening for any sound other than her own ragged breathing. She found what she was looking for in a far corner, tucked behind a towering armoire. A large wooden chest, its lid bolted shut with a heavy iron lock. The lock was rusted but not ancient. It was a newer addition, placed there deliberately to prevent access. Rebecca felt a surge of triumph mixed with a chilling sense of dread. Whatever was inside, someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. She ran her hands over the lid of the chest. The wood was smooth, but with a faint, almost imperceptible pattern carved into it. A key. She needed a key. She searched through the assortment of boxes and discarded belongings, her mind racing. She found a small, rusted tin box filled with old buttons and thimbles, and at the very bottom, nestled among a tangle of old thread, was a small, ornate key, its design echoing the pattern on the chest's lid. Her hands trembling, she slid the key into the lock. It was a perfect fit. With a soft click, the bolt sprang open. Rebecca hesitated, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. What was she about to uncover? The full, unvarnished truth? She took a deep breath and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, the chest was filled with a collection of personal belongings. There were child's clothes, small, delicate dresses and ribbons, all folded neatly. A collection of small handmade dolls, their faces worn and their button eyes staring blankly up at her. A book of children's drawings, the scribbled images of flowers and trees giving way to more unsettling depictions of a house with barred windows and a shadowed figure with an elongated, frightening face. The images were crude, but undeniably disturbing. At the bottom of the chest, she found it. A small, leather-bound diary, its pages filled with a different handwriting. The script was childish at first, a scrawl of a young hand, but it grew neater and more controlled with each entry. It was the diary of Elle, the child, the subject, the experiment. Rebecca sat back on her heels, her lamp casting a pale circle of light on the dust-covered floor. She opened the diary and began to read, her mind a whirlwind of fear and morbid fascination. The first entries were from a young girl, Elle, describing her new home. She wrote about her papa, a man who seemed to love her, but in a cold, clinical way. He would ask her questions about her thoughts, her feelings, her dreams, and write them down in a notebook. He would give her puzzles to solve, tests to complete, and her drawings were always meticulously examined. "Papa says I am a special girl," one entry read. "He says I have a pure mind, untouched by the shadows. He says I must be perfect for him." As the entries progressed, the tone grew darker. The drawings became more sinister. "Papa is not a good man." One entry, in the more controlled hand, read, "He is not my papa. He is a collector. I am a specimen. He watches me. I am always watched." She wrote of a shadow man who would come into her room at night, a man who would watch her while she slept. She wrote of a profound, suffocating loneliness, a feeling of being an object, not a person. Then one of the later entries chilled Rebecca to the bone. "I know who the shadow man is now. He is not just Papa's shadow. He is my shadow. He is inside me. He tells me things. He tells me I am not special. I am not pure. I am him. He tells me I must obey him. He tells me to do things." The entry ended with a series of frantic, almost illegible scribbles. Rebecca's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the diary. The shadow man was a psychological projection, a manifestation of the madness being inflicted upon this child. It was a form of control, a twisted psychological game meant to break a child's will. The last entry was dated a year after the last entry in Eleanor's journal. There was a drawing on the final page, a simple, unsettling sketch of a woman's face, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. And below the drawing, in the precise, controlled handwriting, were the words, "Subject L, terminated, unsuccessful. The corruption was too deep. A new subject is needed." Rebecca dropped the diary as if it were a venomous snake. The sound echoed in the stillness of the attic. The corruption was the child's burgeoning madness, the psychological break that was a direct result of the horrific experiments. And the next subject, a new subject, a new generation. The line of madness that Eleanor had so feared was a cycle, a horrifying legacy that had been passed down from father to son. And Rebecca, now alone with Uncle Silas, was a new subject. A part of a horrifying, ongoing project. A sound from below, a muffled cough, made her freeze. Her blood ran cold. She was not alone. Someone was in the house. She quickly, frantically stuffed the diary back into the chest, the dolls, the clothes, all of it. She closed the lid and tried to push the bolt back into place. It was difficult. She fumbled with it, her fingers clumsy with fear. Finally, with a soft click, it was secured. She quickly returned the small key to the tin box and pushed the chest back into its hiding place behind the armoire. She crept to the edge of the attic door, listening. The house was silent again, the profound, suffocating silence that was more terrifying than any sound. She waited, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Nothing. The sound must have been her imagination, a phantom created by her overactive mind. She crept back down the stairs, her movements a study in quiet desperation. Back in her room, she locked the door behind her and collapsed on the bed, her mind in a state of chaos. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together with a horrifying, sickening clarity. Her Uncle Silas, the last of his line, was not just a recluse. He was a culmination of a family history of psychological experimentation and control. He saw her not as a niece, but as a new subject. The grand house was not a haven, but a laboratory. The silence was not peaceful. It was a deliberate form of psychological manipulation designed to isolate her, to prepare her for what was to come. Rebecca knew with a horrifying certainty that she had to get out. The air in her room suddenly felt thin, the walls pressing in on her. She had to escape this place, this legacy of madness, before she too became a specimen, before her own mind was corrupted, before she too was a victim of the family's dark inheritance. The discovery in the attic solidified Rebecca's resolve. The fear that had been a creeping dread was now a sharp, undeniable truth. She was not in a safe haven. She was in a psychological cage, and her keeper was her own uncle. Her entire demeanor changed. She stopped feigning politeness and began to act with a new, calculated calm. She ate her meals in silence, mirroring her uncle's behavior. She answered his infrequent questions with curt, unrevealing replies. She observed him, noting his habits, his movements, his routines. Uncle Silas seemed to notice the change. He watched her with a new intensity, a subtle flicker of a smile on his lips. It was a cat-and-mouse game, and he was the one who had set the trap. His silence, once a source of her frustration, was now a tool she could use. She was a ghost in her own life, moving through the house with a quiet purpose, her mind a fortress against his psychological ploys. Her plan was simple. She needed to escape. To do that, she needed to know the house, the grounds, and her uncle's habits better than he did. She began to explore in the light of day, no longer confined to her room by fear. She walked the overgrown paths in the garden, noting the best places for cover. She observed the schedules of the few servants, Martha, a young, silent kitchen maid, and a gruff groundskeeper who worked tirelessly in the gardens but never spoke. They were her only contact with the outside world, and she knew she couldn't trust them. They were a part of the house, a part of its silent, complicit history. One afternoon, a letter arrived. A rider, looking exhausted and dusty, delivered it to the groundskeeper. Rebecca, watching from her bedroom window, saw the groundskeeper hand the letter to Martha, who in turn took it to Uncle Silas's study. A small, seemingly insignificant event, but it gave her a new piece of the puzzle. The world outside still existed. There were other people, other places. Her hope, which had been a dying ember, flared into a small, defiant flame. She needed to understand how to get to the nearest town. She decided to risk a direct approach with Martha. She found the old maid in the library, dusting the leather-bound books with a soft cloth. "Martha," Rebecca began, her voice low and calm. "I need to know something. The nearest town. How far is it?" Martha didn't stop her work. "It's a long way, miss. Best not to go alone." "How long exactly?" "A day's ride, maybe more, depending on the road. It's a hard journey, miss, and not for a lady." Rebecca ignored the subtle admonishment. "And who takes the carriage there?" "The master has it seen to," Martha replied, still not looking at her. "The groundskeeper sometimes, or a rider from town." This was a dead end. She wouldn't be able to simply walk to town. The journey was too long, too treacherous. She needed a way to get a message out, to someone she could trust. She had no one, no friends, no family outside of her uncle. But perhaps there was a way to use the mail system. That evening at dinner, Rebecca decided to make her move. She looked at her uncle, who was eating with his usual methodical calm. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding a frantic beat against her ribs. "Uncle Silas," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I was wondering if I could write to a friend. Just a letter. I have some books I've been meaning to send her." He paused, his fork half raised to his mouth. He looked at her, his grey eyes unreadable. The silence stretched between them, a tangible weight. Rebecca held her breath. Finally, he placed his fork down. "A friend? A fine idea, Rebecca. Loneliness can be a dangerous thing. A letter is a small comfort." Her stomach churned. The word dangerous felt like a thinly veiled threat. He was letting her, but on his terms. She knew he would read the letter, of course. She couldn't send a plea for help. It had to be a test, a ruse. She had to write something innocuous, something that would not raise his suspicions, but something that would also contain a hidden message. The next morning she went to the library. Uncle Silas was not there. She found some old paper and an inkwell. She began to write, her mind a storm of thoughts. The letter had to be perfect. A request for books, a discussion of her new life, a message hidden within the seemingly mundane prose. But how? Suddenly a thought struck her. Her best friend from childhood, a woman named Clara, had a shared passion for botany. They had a shared code, a language of flowers. Each flower held a specific meaning, a secret message they had devised as young girls, a game they played in their father's gardens. It was a secret language only they understood. Rebecca began to write, her pen scratching against the paper. She wrote about the grand magnolias and the beautiful yet faded roses. She spoke of the creeping ivy that clung to the house and the weeping willows that guarded the pond. The words were a beautiful, seemingly harmless description of the garden, but to Clara they would be a desperate plea. Magnolias stood for dignity and strength, a message of resilience. Faded roses meant a loss of love, a broken trust. Creeping ivy symbolized a trap, a slow, suffocating capture. And weeping willows were the sign of sorrow and mourning, a deep sadness. The letter was a tapestry of coded messages, a desperate cry for help disguised as a friendly letter. She sealed the letter with a drop of wax from a candle and waited. That evening at dinner, she presented it to Uncle Silas. He took it from her, his long, thin fingers holding the letter with a disconcerting precision. "I will see that it is sent out with the next rider," he said, his gaze fixed on the sealed envelope. "Be aware, Rebecca, the mail is inconsistent in these times. There is no telling when your friend will receive it." It was a warning. He was telling her that he was in control, that she was still isolated. He would read the letter, of course. He would see the words magnolias, roses, ivy, and willows, and he would simply dismiss them as the ramblings of a lonely woman. He wouldn't know the secret language, the desperate plea hidden in plain sight. For the next few days, a new tension settled over the house. Rebecca waited, her heart in her throat, for a sign. A sign that the letter had been sent. A sign that Clara had received it. A sign that someone somewhere knew she was trapped in this web of madness. But the days passed in a silent blur, and nothing happened. The house was a quiet tomb, and she was a ghost within it. Her plan now had two parts. First, she needed to find out if the letter was actually sent. Second, if it was, she needed to be ready for Clara's response. She knew Clara was smart, intuitive. She would understand the code. She would know what to do. But the fear, a cold, creeping thing, still lingered. What if the letter was intercepted? What if Clara was not there? What if Uncle Silas knew more than she thought he did? The house felt like a living creature, its silence a form of deliberate communication. The old floors would creak, the wind would howl through the eaves, and she would hear faint, phantom noises from the darkened corridors. She began to wonder if the house itself was her enemy, a complicit witness to the horrors of her family's past. One evening, unable to sleep, she decided to take a small risk. She knew Uncle Silas's study was on the second floor, down the hall from her own room. She knew he kept a ledger of all incoming and outgoing mail. It was a long shot, but she had to know. She waited until the house was utterly silent, the clock in the main hall having chimed midnight. She slipped out of her room, her bare feet silent on the floorboards, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She crept down the hallway, the shadows long and deep, the portraits on the walls watching her with their empty, vacant eyes. The door to her uncle's study was ajar, a small crack of light emanating from the inside. Rebecca froze. He was in there, but she had seen his light go out an hour ago. She held her breath, her hand on the doorknob. She could hear a faint sound from within, a rhythmic, gentle sound. It wasn't a pen scratching on paper, it was a different sound. She pushed the door open just a crack and peered inside. The room was lit by a single gas lamp on the desk. Uncle Silas was not there. Instead, the young, silent maid was standing over the desk, her back to Rebecca. She was humming a gentle, tuneless lullaby. In her hands, she held a small, delicate box. She opened it, and a gentle light seemed to spill from within. Rebecca's eyes widened in horror. The box was not filled with documents. It was filled with hair. Meticulously arranged locks of hair, of different colors and lengths, each one labeled with a small, elegant tag. She could see names on the tags, names she recognized from the family trees in the ledger. And then she saw a tag on a new, neatly trimmed lock of hair, a lock of light brown hair. The tag read, Rebecca Dawson, 1865. The maid was humming her own lullaby, a lullaby of possession. Rebecca stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a cry. The maid turned, her face a serene, almost blank slate, her eyes empty. She hadn't heard Rebecca. She was in a trance, a part of the house, a part of the madness. Rebecca silently, frantically, backed away, her mind screaming in terror. She had not only been watched, she had been documented. Her every move, her every moment, a part of the family's sick history. Her hair, a part of her body, was a part of her uncle's collection, a twisted scientific record of her psychological decline. She fled back to her room, her heart a frantic, panicked drum against her ribs, and locked the door behind her. She had been so focused on escaping the mental prison that she hadn't considered the physical one. The house was not just a symbol of her family's madness, it was a physical manifestation of it. The psychological games were just the beginning. She was not just a subject, she was a specimen. The discovery of her hairlock was a turning point. The abstract terror of psychological manipulation was now a tangible, physical threat. Rebecca felt a profound sense of violation, a sickening realization that her body, her very being, was a part of her uncle's macabre collection. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, her own face a stranger to her, and felt a cold fury settle in her bones, a fire born from fear. She was not just a victim, she was a woman whose privacy had been brutally stolen, and that gave her a new, defiant purpose. The next few days were a blur of calculated movements. She stopped trying to outwit Uncle Silas and instead focused on the logistics of escape. The letter was a long shot. She needed a more concrete plan. She needed a key to the gate, a way to get out of the compound, and a means of transportation. She began to observe the groundskeeper with a new intensity. He was a silent, gruff man named Thomas, with a face weathered by sun and a body hardened by years of manual labor. He was the one who drove the carriage into town for supplies. She watched him from her window, noting his routines. He kept the carriage in a small, dilapidated shed near the stables. The gate to the compound was always locked at night, its heavy iron bolt secured with a massive padlock. The key, she suspected, was either on his person or in the house. She decided to approach him. He was trimming a hedge near the main house, his back to her, the rhythmic snip-snip-snip of the shears a steady, monotonous sound. She walked out onto the porch, her heart pounding, and spoke his name. "Thomas?" He paused, his shoulders stiffening, and slowly turned to face her. His eyes, a pale blue like Martha's, were wary, suspicious. He said nothing. I'm looking for something, some flowers for my room." She lied, the words feeling clumsy on her tongue. He simply pointed to the overgrown garden, his gaze fixed on a point over her shoulder. It was a polite but firm dismissal. Rebecca realized she couldn't simply ask him for the key. He was a part of this system, and he would not betray his master. She would have to find it herself. That night, she waited until the house was silent and still. The air was heavy, and a storm was brewing in the distance, a low rumble of thunder echoing through the darkness. She slipped out of her room, this time with a specific destination in mind. Uncle Silas's study. The one she had peeked into, the one with the horrifying ledgers and the unsettling discovery. She had to find the key. It was a risk, but it was a necessary one. She crept down the corridor, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The house was alive with strange noises now, the groaning of the old wood, the faint whispers of the wind, the distant rumble of thunder. When she reached the study, the door was locked. She had expected this. She felt along the frame, her fingers tracing the worn wood, searching for a hidden key. Nothing. She was about to give up when she noticed a small, ornate carving on the doorframe, a decorative bird perched on a branch. She pushed on it, and with a soft click, a small section of the wood shifted. Behind it, nestled in a small alcove, was a single, heavy brass key. A key to the gate. A surge of triumph mixed with terror coursed through her. She was so close, but she also knew that this was a test. Uncle Silas was not a fool. He knew she was a curious woman. He had probably placed the key there to see what she would do, to see if she would break the unspoken rules of the house. He was watching. She had to be careful. She took the key and slipped back into her room, her heart pounding. The storm had broken, and the rain was lashing against her window in a furious torrent. She looked out at the gate, at the heavy iron fence that separated her from the outside world. The key felt heavy in her hand, a small, cold weight of possibility. The next day she made her move. She waited until Thomas, the groundskeeper, was in the far corner of the property, working on a distant field. She crept down to the shed where the carriage was kept. The door was unlocked. She slipped inside, the air thick with the scent of hay and old leather. The carriage was an old, sturdy thing, its wheels caked with mud. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of gasoline lingered in the air. She opened the back of the carriage. It was filled with bags of feed and other supplies, but tucked in a corner was a small canvas sack. She opened it and saw what she had hoped to find, a spare key to the carriage. Thomas was a careful, meticulous man. He would have a spare. She now had the key to the gate and the key to the carriage. The plan was coming together. She would wait until nightfall, when the house was silent and the storm had passed. She would take the carriage, unlock the gate, and ride to the nearest town. She would be free. That evening at dinner, a new tension hung in the air. Uncle Silas was unusually talkative. He spoke of the storm, of the way the rain cleansed the land, of the new beginnings that would come with the morning. He spoke with a quiet, unsettling intensity. His words a thin veneer over a core of something cold and calculating. "The night air is crisp," he said, looking at her with his piercing grey eyes. "It is a fine night for a journey." Rebecca's heart leaped into her throat. He knew her plan. He was toying with her, a cat playing with a mouse before the final deadly strike. She felt a cold sweat on her brow, her mind racing. What had she done wrong? Had he seen her at the shed? Had he seen her take the key? She managed a small shaky smile. Perhaps a journey is what the house needs, Uncle. A change of pace. He returned her smile, a slow, knowing grin that sent a shiver down her spine. Perhaps, but a long journey is not for the faint of heart. One must be prepared. The meal ended, and Rebecca returned to her room, her mind in a state of frantic panic. She had to leave, now, before he made his move, before he sealed her fate. She quickly gathered her few belongings, stuffing them into a small bag. She put on her thickest shawl and her sturdy walking boots. The storm had passed, and the air was now crisp and cool. The moon, a sliver of silver, was visible through the clouds. She crept out of her room, the bag slung over her shoulder, the keys clutched in her hand. She moved with a quiet desperation, a ghost in her own house. When she reached the back door, she unlocked it with a soft click and slipped outside into the cool, damp night. The air smelled of wet earth and damp leaves. The shadows were deep, the ancient trees a wall of darkness against the faint moonlight. She made her way to the stables, her heart pounding in her ears. The carriage was still there, a dark, silent hulk in the gloom. She unlocked the door and slipped inside, the leather seats cold against her skin. She fumbled with the key, her hands shaking, and finally managed to get the carriage started, the old engine sputtering to life with a soft roar. She rode down the long, winding driveway, the wheels crunching on the wet gravel. The gate was ahead, a dark, foreboding silhouette against the night sky. She stopped the carriage, her hands trembling, and dismounted. She took the heavy brass key and slid it into the padlock. It clicked open with a soft, final sound. She pushed the heavy iron gate open, its hinges groaning in protest. She was so close. Freedom was within her grasp. She climbed back into the carriage, her hands still shaking, and began to drive through the open gate. As she passed through, she looked back at Blackwood Manor, at its imposing silhouette against the moonlit sky. It looked like a living creature, a hungry beast, its windows like vacant eyes watching her departure. And then she saw it. A figure on the porch, a tall, gaunt figure, his hands in his pockets, his posture as still and silent as the night itself. It was Uncle Silas. He was standing there watching her go. He raised a hand, not in a wave, but in a slow, almost regal gesture of farewell. The motion was a quiet, cold, and unsettling acknowledgement of her escape. A confirmation that he had known her plan all along. He had let her go. He was letting her run. The realization sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the night air. Why? Why would he let her go? What was his game? Was this another part of the psychological torment, a twisted form of a cat-and-mouse game? She had escaped the physical confines of the house, but she hadn't escaped the mental ones. Her uncle's presence, his quiet, knowing farewell, made her realize that she was still a part of his game, a pawn in his long, elaborate play. She drove down the winding, dark road, the trees looming over her, their branches like skeletal fingers. The silence of the night was replaced by the clatter of the carriage and the sound of her own frantic breathing. She was free, but she wasn't safe. Her uncle's gaze, his quiet, knowing smile, was still with her. He had let her go. But she had a terrifying feeling that she was still on his chessboard, a pawn in his game. Her escape was not an end. It was a new, more horrifying beginning. The journey through the woods was a frantic blur of sound and motion. The rhythmic clatter of the carriage, the thud of the horse's hooves on the dirt road, and the insistent whisper of the wind through the leaves were a constant, unsettling soundtrack to Rebecca's racing thoughts. The moon, a sliver of silver in the star-strewn sky, was her only guide. She drove with a frantic, desperate energy, her hands gripping the reins so tightly her knuckles were white. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every snap of a twig in the undergrowth a confirmation that she was being followed. Her uncle's face, His calm, knowing smile was seared into her mind. Why had he let her go? The question, a cold knot of dread, was a far more terrifying companion than any imagined pursuer. The woods were a silent, alien world, a maze of ancient trees with gnarled, twisting branches that seemed to reach out to her. Spanish moss hung in thick, spectral curtains, swaying gently in the barely perceptible breeze. The air grew colder, and a damp, earthy scent filled her lungs, a smell of decay and forgotten things. She passed no one, saw no lights from distant homesteads. The world seemed to have vanished, leaving her alone in a sea of silent, watchful trees. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only an hour or two, the trees began to thin. A faint glow on the horizon, a warm, inviting flicker of light, signaled a new hope. She had reached the outskirts of the nearest town. The relief that washed over her was so profound, it almost brought her to her knees. She was free. She had escaped. The first building she saw was an old, dilapidated tavern, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. The sounds of raucous laughter and a piano playing a tinny tune drifted on the night air. She pulled the carriage to a halt in the small, muddy lot and dismounted, her legs feeling wobbly beneath her. Her heart, which had been a frantic drum for hours, was finally beginning to slow. She was not in a town. She was in a small, isolated settlement, a collection of a few ramshackle buildings. The tavern, a general store that was locked and shuttered, and a few scattered homes were all that existed here. This was the source of the faint light she had seen. Her heart sank. This was not the bustling town she had imagined. It was a small, quiet, and likely isolated place. She walked towards the tavern, the sounds of laughter and music a comforting, if raucous, presence. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, and the warm, smoky air, thick with the scent of beer and pipe tobacco, washed over her. The room was filled with men, their faces tired and worn, their clothes caked with dust and mud. They were farmers, laborers, men who had been to war and returned to a country that was still a battlefield of its own. A man behind the bar, a large, burly figure with a thick beard and a kind, weary face, looked up as she entered. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of a woman in a nice dress, alone and at such a late hour. The laughter died down, and a few men turned to stare at her. The silence that followed was heavy and awkward. I need a room," Rebecca said, her voice a shaky whisper. The man nodded, his eyes kind. We got a room upstairs. It ain't much, but it's dry. You travelin' alone, ma'am?" Rebecca's mind raced. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't risk telling anyone about her uncle, about the house, about the terrifying secrets she had uncovered. "Yes, I'm on my way to my sister's. My carriage broke down." The lie, a clumsy one, felt like a shield. He didn't press her. He simply nodded and gestured to a narrow, rickety staircase in the corner. "Top of the stairs, third door on the right. Name's John. You need anything, just holler." Rebecca felt a surge of gratitude. The simple kindness was a balm to her raw nerves. She walked to the stairs, ignoring the stares of the men, and climbed to her room. The room was small, sparse, and smelled faintly of damp wood and old linen. But it was safe. The small rattling window looked out onto a dark field, and the lock on the door was a simple, old-fashioned latch, but it felt like a fortress. She sat on the edge of the bed, her mind in a state of turmoil. She was free, but she was also stranded. This was not a town with a train station or a telegraph office. This was a place where information traveled by word of mouth, a place where a new face would be a subject of intense scrutiny. She had no money, no connections, and her only lead was a letter she had sent to Clara, a letter that might never reach her. She had to get to a real town, a place where she could get help. But to do that, she needed money, and she needed a way to get there. The carriage was an asset, but it was also a liability. It was a link to Blackwood Manor. It was a constant reminder of her uncle's chilling smile. She knew she couldn't stay. Her uncle had let her go. He was a man who planned everything, a man who saw life as a complex, meticulously orchestrated experiment. He wouldn't have simply let her escape unless it was part of a larger plan. He was a hunter, and she was the prey he had set free, a new variable in his sick game. The next morning, she woke with the sun. The tavern was quiet, the men from the night before having gone to their farms. She went downstairs, her mind made up. She would sell the carriage. It was a valuable asset, and it was her only way to get to a real town, to get a message to Clara. She found John, the tavern owner, in the empty, silent room, wiping down the bar. She told him her plan. He looked at her with a gentle, questioning look. "A fine carriage like that? It's a big thing to sell, ma'am. You sure you want to?" "I am," she said, her voice firm. "I have no use for it. I just need enough to get to the nearest town." He nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. "There's a man here in town, a Mr. Hemlock. He buys and sells things. He might be interested. I can take you to him." Mr. Hemlock was a thin, wiry man with a shrewd look in his eyes and a handshake that was surprisingly firm. He was a man who saw value in things others had discarded. He looked at the carriage, at its sturdy frame, at the well-fed horses, and his eyes lit up. He saw a valuable asset, not a symbol of a twisted family's madness. He offered her a fair price, more than enough for her to get to the nearest town. Rebecca accepted the money, a small, worn pouch filled with coins, and felt a profound sense of relief. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a woman with a plan, a woman with a purpose. She was no longer running from the past. She was building a future. That evening, as she sat on a bench outside the tavern, waiting for a passing rider or a supply wagon that would take her to the nearest town, she saw him. A man on a horse, a tall, gaunt figure, his posture ramrod straight. He was riding slowly down the road, his head turning from side to side, his gaze scanning the small settlement. It was Uncle Silas. Her heart leaped into her throat, a wave of cold, paralyzing terror washing over her. He had come for her. The thought, a sudden, horrifying realization, was a cold shock to her system. He had let her go. He had let her run. It was all a part of his game, a way to test her, to see what she would do, to see how far she would run. He was not just hunting her, he was studying her, a meticulous, patient scientist observing his specimen. She ran inside the tavern, her mind screaming in a silent panic. She hid in the back, in the small empty kitchen, and peered through a crack in the door, her body shaking with a profound, bone-deep fear. She watched as he dismounted, his movements as fluid and precise as ever. He walked into the tavern, his imposing figure filling the doorway. The men at the bar, who had been talking and laughing just moments before, fell silent, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. He said nothing. He simply stood there, his gaze sweeping the room, his eyes a cold, piercing grey. He looked at the empty seats, at the faces of the men, at the bar, his expression an unreadable mask. He was looking for her. He was hunting her. Rebecca felt a sickening realization settle in her stomach. He wasn't just here to find her. He was here to show her that she was not free. He was here to remind her that she was still a part of his game. He was here to prove that she was still his. He finally turned, his gaze sweeping over the door she was hiding behind, and a slow, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. It was a smile of triumph, a smile that said, "I see you. You cannot hide. You are still mine." And then, as silently as he had come, he turned and walked out, leaving the stunned, silent men in his wake. Rebecca felt a profound sense of despair. Her escape was a delusion. She was still trapped. She had escaped the physical prison, but the psychological one was still with her. He had simply let her trade one cage for another. Her uncle's gaze, his knowing smile, was her new prison. She was his, and she would always be his. The game was far from over. It was just beginning. Rebecca's fleeting freedom vanished in an instant. Her uncle had found her. His silent, knowing smile was a chilling confirmation. She was a specimen in his experiment, a bird briefly released only to be recaptured. Her escape, she realized, had been part of his game. She left the tavern, walking for hours in the oppressive darkness. Every rustle of a leaf was a new source of terror. Exhausted and desperate, she finally saw a light, a small, welcoming farmhouse. A kind woman named Elizabeth took her in, offering warmth and a temporary sanctuary from her nightmare. For 2 days, Rebecca rested, finding a flicker of hope. On the 3rd day, Elizabeth and her husband, Robert, drove her to a bustling town. At the telegraph office, Rebecca sent a coded message to her friend, Clara. "Ivy is gone. Willows are dry, roses are blooming, awaiting your signal, RD." It was a message of freedom, telling Clara the danger was over. A week passed. Rebecca found a job and began to build a new life. Then, a letter arrived from Clara. A postscript in her uncle's precise handwriting was at the bottom. "Your friend has a strong will. She will be a fine addition to the collection." Her blood ran cold. He had intercepted the message, decoded it, and was now going after Clara. He was using her love for her friend as a weapon. A cold, determined fury replaced Rebecca's fear. She couldn't run. Running had only led Clara into the line of fire. She had to fight. First, she sent a new telegram to Clara. "Do not come. Danger. The weeping willows are still mourning. I am in the city, awaiting a sign. RD." It was a direct warning to stay away. A day later, Clara's reply arrived. "Magnolias are strong. Waiting for you. CL." Clara had understood. She was not coming to Rebecca, but was waiting for her. Rebecca packed her bags, her mind set. She would not be a pawn in her uncle's game. She would be the one to end it. She would go to Clara, and together, they would expose him. The train ride was filled with a new kind of terror, but she was not alone. Clara was with her, her face a mask of grim determination. They met in the city and Rebecca told her everything, the diaries, the secrets, the chilling psychological experiments. Clara, horrified, insisted they go to the authorities. Rebecca shook her head. No one would believe them. They needed proof. The only proof was at Blackwood Manor. "I have to go back," Rebecca said, her voice filled with a cold resolve. "He won't kill me. I am a specimen. He wants to see what I will do." Clara, her eyes filled with fear, agreed to go with her. They were no longer victims. They were 2 spies on a mission. Rebecca bought a gun. Its cold, heavy weight was an empowering comfort. She was no longer a victim. She was a fighter. They returned to the estate. As they approached the house, Rebecca felt a profound fear, a living, breathing thing. "He's here," Clara whispered. "I know," Rebecca replied, her voice filled with a new, cold resolve. "He's waiting for us. He wants us to come." They found a hidden path and slipped through a back door that Clara picked open with a hairpin. The air inside was heavy, and the silence was a watchful presence. The game was on. The silence of Blackwood Manor was a suffocating presence. Rebecca and Clara moved like ghosts through the darkened halls, their single lantern casting long, dancing shadows. Their goal was the attic, where Rebecca had found the diaries. But the attic door was locked. He had anticipated their return. They found a back staircase leading to the west wing, its air cold and thick with the scent of decay. The door to Uncle Silas's study was ajar, an invitation. Rebecca pushed it open. The room was empty. The ledgers were gone. He had taken the evidence. A profound despair washed over her until she saw a new journal on the desk. She opened it with trembling hands. It was his own diary, a confession of his twisted research and his obsession with the purity of the Dawson bloodline. He wrote of his father's failed experiments and his own, meticulously documenting Rebecca's every move, her courage, and her defiance. He had been watching them all along. Suddenly the door to the study clicked shut. A low, gravelly voice came from the shadows. "I am disappointed, Rebecca. I expected a more original plan." Uncle Silas emerged, his face a mask of cold triumph. He had let them in. He had led them to this moment. "You are a worthy specimen," he said, smiling. "You have shown remarkable resilience." Clara, terrified, backed away. "You're insane." He laughed. "Insanity is a matter of perspective. I am a curator, preserving a legacy. The Dawson line is a work of art, and you, Rebecca, are the final subject." He told her the diary was not proof, but his own narrative, a final entry for his collection. He went to a cabinet and revealed a collection of jars holding parts of his family's past. A lock of hair, a finger. He pulled out a vial of a strange liquid. "A new serum," he whispered, "to make the mind perfect, to make the will mine." He lunged at Clara. Rebecca drew her gun. The choice was a terrible one. Kill him and become a murderer, or let Clara become a victim of his madness. The world seemed to slow down. Rebecca would not be a murderer, nor would she be a victim. She chose a third path. She aimed the gun, not at her uncle, but at the lantern. With a shaky shot, she shattered the glass, plunging the room into darkness. The sound of the shot was a shock to his system. For the first time, she saw pure, unadulterated rage in his eyes. "Run!" Rebecca whispered to Clara, grabbing her hand. They stumbled through the dark, hearing Uncle Silas's guttural growl close behind them. They burst from the house and ran through the dark woods, not stopping until their lungs burned. He didn't follow. He had lost for now. They hid in an abandoned barn for the night. Rebecca knew the fight wasn't over. She couldn't rely on the diaries or ledgers. He had taken them. Her only weapon was the truth. The next morning they walked to a bustling city and found the local sheriff. Rebecca told him everything, a strange, fantastical story that was met with skepticism. But then John, the tavern owner, arrived, confirming her story of the unsettling man. The sheriff's curiosity was piqued. A week later, a group of lawmen found Blackwood Manor abandoned. The portraits, furniture, and ledgers were all gone. He had vanished without a trace. But in the main parlor, they found a small music box with a note from Uncle Silas. "The experiment is complete. The subject is free. The bloodline, once again, is pure. The line of madness has been passed. And now, the true experiment begins." A profound chill ran through Rebecca. He hadn't broken the cycle. He had passed it on. He had let her go because she was now the new carrier. She was free, but she was forever a part of his legacy. The line of madness had not been broken. It had been reborn in her.